The opinions of the guests and host are their own and do not represent the opinions of Ironclad, the Border Patrol, or the Department of Homeland Security.
I'm now in a gunfight with that shooter who's coming back around the corner to see what he's doing. Unbeknownst to me, I've got another gunman, this bad guy's partner, in a fortified position, concealed 7 yards ahead of me with a sawed-off shotgun with a 12 gauge with buckshot and another pistol. And literally, if my sheriff's deputies had not engaged that guy and seen him with their M4s, we wouldn't be having this conversation now, and nothing would have developed on us continuing to do that. So in that 8-second, little firefight, everything changed. Everything absolutely changed. That was the first gunfight, Vince, where an officer in the country had been hit by one of these cartel growers, and it happened to be a young game warden. So you can imagine what the governor's office was saying. You can imagine what the press in the Bay Area, where they're like, a game warden just got shot and near fatally. He's being air extracted after waiting 3 hours for an air rescue. He's going into surgery. What are game wardens doing in this, man? That's not their job.
Right.
But brother, no one realized it is absolutely our job because of the environmental mandate and because we work in the woods.
We cut through the partisan talking points. We're not interested in perpetuating fear. We're interested in seeking truth, hearing what's really going on America's borderland. Welcome to Borderland, an Ironclad original. Today we bring you a conversation with John Nores. John worked as a California Department Fish and Wildlife Game Warden for more than 25 years. He has a wealth of knowledge when it comes to cartel activity that unfortunately has made its way up our backyard here in the U.S. The second edition of his book, Hidden War, How Special Operations Game Wardens Are Reclaiming America's Wildlands from the Drug Cartels, is out now. Hope you enjoy the conversation. This is so fascinating. When I started looking at your story and checking it out online, I was like, man, we worked similar things, but I never knew that, the game wardens were in that deep. It's a different mission than I even know. And I was learning so much about some of your interviews. What year did this become like, shit, this is a thing?
It actually started, I'm going to say 2004, when I found my first grow with a biologist informant that I grew up. I had a hunting buddy that was a family friend, knew him since second grade. He becomes a wildlife biologist at San Jose State University, which is both of are the schools we went to here in the Silicon Valley for college. Real savvy fieldcraft, hunter, knew his stuff. And now he's doing a fisheries study and an endangered species study on two real pristine creeks, literally a stone's throw from where I grew up, right on the edge of a big state park, second largest state park in California called Henrico State Park, 105,000 acres, full of wildlife, arduous backpacking conditions, and where I actually learned to backpack and learn my fieldcraft before I ever went into the game warden profession or snipers or any of that. And he's doing this study. This is back in 2004, and he's watching two creeks, and one of the creeks suddenly just goes bone dry. And there's all kinds of garbage and plastic and stuff running down it and like waste and threatened endangered steelhead trout, red-legged frog, all these threatened endangered sensitive species that thrive on this creek are suddenly dead. And this is like April, Vince. So why is it dry? Winter runoff, that creek should have been ripping. So I get the call, and in my first book, I call sign him GI for, obvious reasons. And GI goes, bro, this is crazy. You know where I'm at doing my study. You've been up here a ton of times. This one creek's bone dry. Something is way wrong. We got high rainfall. We got to check it out. Someone's stealing that water. So of course, I connect with him. We run up in the 4-wheel drive. We get up on the top of a mountain. It's a really steep canyon. We dive down. He's an unarmed civilian, but skilled. I've got my AR, my pack, no cell coverage, no radio. Once we get down into this canyon, I expect, Vince, honestly, to find some sort of sedate water diversion that I would normally see, like maybe a rancher taking water from another creek because they need more for cattle. Maybe someone stealing it for, a water source, or it's kind of a nomadic homeless type camp. And what we were about to see, brother, changed everything, because we hike down into this canyon and we find where this check dam is. The cartels are really good at making these visqueen line check dams, of digging into waterways, putting up a earthen dam by hand, and then diverting that water, even camouflaging how they're diverting that water to get to the cannabis, to fortify the grow wherever they need water. We find that diversion, and then we start tactically working our way down this canyon, very steep, very wooded, real beautiful, but, again, a noisemaker. And we start working our way down and we find this water line that suddenly goes to 18-inch cannabis plants. And then we start to see camouflage tarps, camouflage gear, stuff that was really well hidden. And at this time, this is post 9/11 and we didn't have a tactical unit yet, but I was already working with SWAT teams here in the Bay Area. I was already a sniper. I was already a sniper instructor, teaching classes with my fellow guys from the military and LE teams in the Silicon Valley. And I'm going, whoever's camped here has skills. I mean, they're camouflaging their stuff like we do. They're putting it in dense layers of cover until you walk right up on it. You don't even know you're in an encampment or a processing station or seeing the poisons. And I went, we're going into something hot. So obviously the alert factor went up. And as we're working around the corner, I see some movement up the canyon, and here come two growers, and they're both dressed in OD green BDUs. One guy's got the AK, the other guy's got the machete, and they're walking in a formation like you would have on your teams or I do on mine, Vince. They're walking in a two-man formation, static line, and just working slow. And the guy on the back end is constantly checking his 6 o'clock. He's moving slowly. He's not making real furtive movements. So he's got some skill sets like what our tail gunners would do in our tactical teams. And the guy in front is being very quiet, and he's kneeling down and he's like trimming plants. He's adjusting little water drip lines. And I'm like, and I got my buddy with me. He's not a cop. And I'm like, okay, man, this is different. We have just seen something I've never seen before. These guys do not belong here. They were Sinaloa cartel guys. They were growers straight out of Mexico that had been in play for a long time, I'm sure, in California. And I don't know this yet, but I'm about to.
Yeah.
And so fortunately, we're hugging a creek bank. I've got my red dot on my AR around the corner in case these guys come around the corner. They're working right to us. One guy's obviously armed. This is the last thing I want to do is get in a gunfight today with my biologist buddy with no radio comms to, radio anybody. That would have been an interesting thing to explain to my bosses. And we just stayed tight. We didn't move. We used our field craft. He was very woodsy, my partner, fortunately. And these guys got 15 yards from us, kind of looked right through us where we were hiding in the creek. And they worked their way out and then up the canyon and disappeared. And, the oh shit moment was like, all right, we're going to sit tight for a while. We're going to creep out of here. We're not going any further. We've seen enough. And we boost out of that big mountain climb and we get out. And I'm processing everything now. Well, I got to talk to some people. This is not a game warden thing. We're not going to come in and raid this with a couple of partners, right? And now it's talking to narcotic team task forces, DEA, other agencies. This was the first introduction I had to a really squared away tier 1 tactical unit with the Santa Clara County Sheriff's Office and their marijuana eradication team. And those were all the snipers from their SWAT team on that. And just good guys. They all had hunting and fishing backgrounds. They came from other parts of the country. So I didn't know it yet, but I had inherent lovers of those conservation things we love, wildlife, waterlands, waterways, and they saw that threat to our wildlife as well as to our public. And now we kind of led the charge on how to get those guys in there. About 3 weeks later, we raided it with about 20, 30 officers. We chased the guys, not effectively. They got away. I saw some things we could have done differently moving forward from that. We eradicated 7,000 plants that morning in that one grow site. We did not know at the time, Vince, that the cartels were bringing up the EPA banned neurotoxins that are basically insecticides that were banned in the U.S. 20 years ago because the EPA determined how deadly they are, even when they're diluted and put on our crops. But Sinaloa, the other cartels were bringing them straight up from Tijuana because they are available in third world countries. And this stuff was all over the plants. It was all over in those grow sites. And we did not know the toxicity of this stuff yet, or that we were even exposed to it. We would later learn that. And we cut the plants. We left. A PAFOC helicopter came in from Moffett Field, the 129th counter drug. I did my first hoist line into a big PAFOC. That was a cool morning to do that. Obviously, you've worked out of a lot of Black Hawk ships, I'm sure, as well. And I would spend the next 15 years working with military assets like your old teams, doing counter drug domestically and with foreign guys that have been over, fighting the GWAT. So never saw that coming. But the one thing we didn't see that morning of such a flood of information on that first operation was how many things I felt we could have done different. And the fact that once everything was eradicated, it was like, okay, call in the ship. It's been a hard, arduous day. We're going to get out of here. I'm like, whoa. There's, 300 pounds of nitrous fertilizer right here. And there's, camps and dirty oils and human excrement. And there's just all this destruction to the water, and all these banks are cut. all this vegetation's gone. This is a train wreck, man. This water's poisoned. And I knew that this wasn't just a creek. This was a creek that sustained steelhead trout, which are migratory trout that come up from the ocean, come upstream, spawn in fresh water, and leave. And they're threatened and endangered on the federal level, where they're almost gone on the Pacific side of the country. And this directly affected that. And the word I got from everybody on the teams, from the other agencies was, you know what, that's not our thing, man. We just raid, we do what we got to do. We're not funded for this, and we don't have the time. And I understood it wasn't a dig. We were making new partners, but I realized that the environmental element is important, and this is what's going to get people fired up, because people are starting to not care about the weed issue. We know it's going to be regulated. They're looking at bigger fish to fry, but they didn't know these impacts. So from then on, we just started to move forward. So fast forward to a year later, August 5th, 2005, myself, I've just promoted to lieutenant of 7 wardens in 3 counties. And I've got 2 young wardens with me on their first grow raid, with that same group of really squared away sheriff's deputies that I mentioned before, the Santa Clara County Sheriff's marijuana eradication team. And the 6 of us are going into a grow site in the affluent hills of Los Gatos, Silicon Valley, basically. And we're hiking up on an August morning. We're looking down at Cisco, Facebook, eBay, all the tech capital companies. And we're an eye shot of this in the Silicon Valley foothills. And now we're into a massive grow site. We're crawling through tunnels. It is in the middle of harvest time. There's a couple of hard gunmen in there defending the grow. Same type of deal. Green BDUs, SKSs, pistols, you name it. Patron saint monikers that I would later learn about, either embroidered on their belts or in pendants or in tattoos, things like that. Didn't know anything about that yet. And we got an ambush, 1 shot fired from one of their gunmen as we were moving into the grow, and it happened to strike my young warden partner who had been on a year through both legs. So we had 1 AK round, 7.62 by 39, steel core full metal jacket, go through his left leg and exit and tumble through his other right leg. So he's bleeding out of 4 holes now. I'm now in a gunfight with that shooter who's coming back around the corner to see what he's doing. Unbeknownst to me, I've got another gunman, this bad guy's partner, in a fortified position, concealed 7 yards ahead of me with a sawed-off shotgun with a 12 gauge with buckshot and another pistol. And literally, if my sheriff's deputies had not engaged that guy and seen him with their M4s, we wouldn't be having this conversation now, and nothing would have developed on us continuing to do that. So in that 8-second, little firefight, everything changed. Everything absolutely changed. That was the first gunfight, Vince, where an officer in the country had been hit by one of these cartel growers, and it happened to be a young game warden. So you can imagine what the governor's office was saying. You can imagine what the press in the Bay Area, where they're like, a game warden just got shot and near fatally. He's being air extracted after waiting 3 hours for an air rescue. He's going into surgery. What are game wardens doing in this, man? That's not their job.
Right.
But brother, no one realized it is absolutely our job because of the environmental mandate and because we work in the woods. So
but
bonds were starting to be built. Yeah.
Until that point, they've never seen anything like it.
Exactly. Exactly.
I want to back up. There's so much to unpack there, brother. There's so much, and I want to. How far? Just to put in perspective for people who are listening to this and probably don't realize, how far is the border, the actual border from that location?
Yeah, from where that happened in Silicon Valley, we're looking at about 500 miles.
500 miles.
500 miles, brother. And having started my career down in Riverside, San Diego County border, and I was starting to work with you guys on the Border Patrol side when I was a brand new game warden in 91, 92. I mean, I'm like 22 years old down there, learning to just do general patrol. And I've got, migration floods coming across my backyard down there on the San Diego border, working with Border Patrol guys right out of the Riverside office down there. But yeah, we're talking a long stretch. We're talking 500 miles away and embedded in not just that part of Silicon Valley, but really running operations all over California.
Yeah, exactly. That's kind of what I wanted to put in perspective for the listeners, that it is 500 miles away. You have Cartel establishing grows in the middle of the forests, of the middle of lands of American lands, and they're carrying AK-47s. They're tactically sound, right? They're destroying the environment, but no one thinks about it. No one even realizes that. We talk so much about the border itself. Now, this is a border topic, but you don't realize well past the border, hour drive. I mean, probably an 8-hour, 9-hour drive, whatever that is. But
Right.
point being is that there's Cartel in the middle of a forest somewhere growing marijuana. Like, and at that time, I'm sure that was, I mean, when I was in, we were trying to catch as much marijuana as possible. Now it's probably different, but to walk up on that, I imagine when 2004, your first moment of seeing that, did you think at any point like, oh, this is Cartel? Or it was just like, what the hell is this?
You know, they look like Sandinista rebels, honestly, working in our forest, which, and you know, we got really, people don't realize the Silicon Valley, you get out of the San Jose Central Valley, the tech capital, and you got a ton of amazing wildlands, state parks, county parks, beautiful creeks, and flooded with a diversity of wildlife that's just unprecedented anywhere else in the country. And to see those guys in that element, I did not know for sure they were Cartel yet. I certainly had that suspicion, but that's what they look like. They look like, you know, some foreign military type element growing cannabis. And I was like, this, you know, I mean, it's like in my backyard, literally. If this had been down in Riverside County, Vince, it would have been, okay, well, here I am in LA. I'm really close to the border. I'm down in San Diego line. But here I am in my backyard where I grew up hunting and fishing and cattle branding and working with my local ranchers. And, you know, so it was a very big day of awareness. And it was also very personal. You know, this thing has become a personal fight, especially here at home. And ironically, the marijuana enforcement team, the tactical unit that I'd be very lucky to co-found and then lead and pick the guys and go a very different direction with the blessing of a real progressive chief and one of my mentors at the time, Mike Carrion. I didn't see that coming at that time, but since 9/11, after, you know, that heinous terrorist attack we sustained here in this great nation, I knew at some point game wardens were going to have a tactical element or have those capabilities and skills, because we were going to be called upon to work with you guys at the federal level, our county, our state, our local allied agencies. We knew terrorism was an issue. We knew active shooters were increasing, the school problem. And sure enough, so we were behind the scenes developing those skills. And I was keeping an eye on everyone that was becoming game wardens in California that had special forces military experience. Yeah. They were on, you know, came from other law enforcement teams that maybe had a tactical SWAT element to them. And just guys that were, like anything, with a really good team that you've been on, and I know you've been blessed to do some amazing things with some amazing teammates, finding the guys that are absolutely amazing, the 1%ers of what they do, but their egos are absolutely non-existent. I mean, they're just so down to earth. We got each other's backs. Everybody's like, what can I do for you? No one's that, you know, standout wide receiver diva on an NFL team. We're just in here to do the best job we can and really love what we're doing. And man, dude, I was so lucky to have those brothers and build that team. I can't even speak highly enough of it. And we were really lucky. I didn't see any of that coming at the time in 2004, but I knew that our game was going to change. And if I had any say in it, seeing the environmental impacts from these guys and what they were doing, we couldn't do it on a patrol element. I needed people really skilled. We needed good equipment, and we needed support more than anything else. Air assets, administration, tactical med, equipment, all of that. And it would take 13 years to get there, but eventually we would get there. Yeah.
I imagine, man. Well, can you discuss maybe why did they even start doing grow operations in America, and especially so far north of the border? What was the reason for that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the thing about it is the way this cannabis is grown by, especially the Mexican cartels, is all vetted down from central Mexico. Sinaloa, those mountains, anything down there. The growers we were seeing up in California, for example, and that we'd find out they'd be in 27 other states as well, really cut their teeth and got vetted in the organization by growing really potent cannabis, diverting water perfectly, hiding it, using camouflage, using field craft, like I discussed what we saw in that first 04 grow. And they really get vetted down there growing that tainted, poisoned, but very, lucrative weed in Mexico. And it was being, smuggled across the border, whether it was tunnels, it was mules on their back, panga boats that we would start to see the offshore one-way pangas coming in. But we had a lot more border control. And I know I'm preaching to the choir on this, brother. We had some semblance of you guys holding the line a little bit, and Texas game wardens and state troopers and everybody else on that border with policy, and then eventually wanting to get the wall up and different technology with sensors and whatnot. We were interdicting quite a bit of it. It was still making it here. So the cartels decided, hey, we were embedded in America anyway. We need to start getting our good growers up there and get them basically growing it where it's going to be distributed. And, even if some of it gets interdicted, our guys are good. We can outproduce, we can outgrow, we can put more operations out there. We're going to put it in really hard places for guys to get. We're going to we're going to divert water for sometimes 2-3 miles. I've literally seen water diversions in a black pipe go 3 miles. I kid you not. So the growers are crafty. I have a ton of respect for how hard they work. I wish they were using that skill set for something positive, but they're really good at what they do. And once they started doing it, California is where it started. It started in San Diego, Riverside, and those national forests. It worked its way north. It started way back in the early 90s, late 80s, when I was, just starting my career, and I wasn't privy to that yet. But they would just get their distribution, get their organization, their straight line, basically their linear, distribution lineup all across the country. And they were very effective at getting most of their product back east and sold on the black market for decades. And and then still keeping it coming in from Mexico, but then also doing it internally so they could just flood the market and, of course, increase their profits.
Yeah, I was talking to Matthew Thomas, who is the deputy sheriff out of Pinal County. I'm sure you're familiar with him, right? And he said, he goes, some of these guys are so smart and so good at what they do. I wish they would have just came work for us instead. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, these guys would have been great scouts. They would have been paid way better. We could have got them into great retirement systems, and but yeah, we've gone and like you too. I know you've worked a ton of hard cases. One thing I liked about this job is it wasn't easy. Being a hunter of wildlife from an ethical standpoint as a conservationist, and then going against a poacher that's the hardest to catch and the most dangerous is what really made this an exciting job. And knowing that it wasn't going to be easy to catch him, it wasn't going to be easy to shut him down, but we knew it was going to matter. I knew that every grow site we could effectively stop, whether we caught growers or not. We stopped the water diversions. We took out the poison weeds. So we knew it wasn't getting to the market. We knew we hurt them in the pocketbook. We knew we were protecting public safety because the carbofuran that they're spraying all over on these plants, Vince, it goes on like kind of a white, opaque, misty paint, or it looks like bird droppings. And when you see that, and we see that now, that stuff is like a hazmat, red hot, don't breathe it, don't go near it. But within 24 to 48 hours, those poisons they put on the weed, it dries invisible. So the weed looks shiny and beautiful, but it's got these neurotoxins, anticoagulants that, the nerve agents that Nazis actually developed for their World War II bio program is the same active ingredients in some of these poisons that are in these insecticides. When I knew that was on this weed, and we could have your kids, my nieces and nephews, grandkids, anybody out there experimenting, medicinal users anywhere in the country, and not knowing what they're ingesting, that stepped up the game from just wildlife loss and water poisoning and everything else. So every grow we hit, no matter how hard it was, we're making a dent. And now it's an uphill battle in all the states as we incentivize more and more of black market with poor regulations. And well, we could talk about the border all day and what's happening down there, but we're now embedded where the problem is so far north. We got more to worry about than just, tightening up our border at this point, for sure.
I was jumped a few years ago at a gas station. What are some easy to use self-defense techniques?
What is the most cost-effective way to make sure my home is secure?
What would happen if there was a global internet or cellular outage? What is your suggestion for comms?
What should I do if I hear shots ringing out?
Or what I should do if there's a major terrorist attack.
How is your faith tied in to being a protector?
Is there a moral case for taking a life?
What is your recommendation on critical EDC?
What should I have? What's the best?
What should I do?
What does that look like?
What would you recommend? Is there anything I could do?
Yeah, exactly. I want to learn more about the environmental damages. I don't know much about it. It's not a world that I'm familiar with. I don't understand the chemicals that they use or any of that. So I would love one for me to learn, but also for the audience to understand why this is such a big issue.
Yeah, another great question, brother. And I appreciate you asking it because, my latest book is called Hidden War. We're into the second edition now that's been updated after it was published 3 years ago to get into the trends with the poisons and what's changed with that. that? What's happened since COVID, since pandemic lockdowns? What have the cartels adapted to? How have they taken advantage and exploited our chaotic world of the pandemic and post-pandemic? And what's happened with the change in border policy? How easy is it for these guys to get these chemicals in? Well, now it's not even an issue. Before, they would have to smuggle them in with their growers. They'd have to spend, and we debriefed, and I talk about this in Hidden War, we debriefed a tier 1 level plaza boss running 50 to 100 grows in Northern California that was actually picked up and popped by our white dope team in Silicon Valley for a 22-pound methamphetamine cook operation. And obviously, I got to sit in on that debrief interview with DEA and a bunch of other people and Q&A him very candidly. He was very honest. He didn't want to go away for the rest of his life. And obviously, everything stays anonymous for obvious reasons on that. But I asked specifically, why the poisons, man? Why are you bringing in these neurotoxins that are even deadly to your own growers? And basically what he told me, Vince, he said, it's what has been effective for us in the system since day one when we've been growing this stuff in Mexico. And we are aware of the dangers. And you're starting to see growers with nitrile gloves and personal protection equipment when they're putting this stuff on the plants. He said, but we're not going to change because it's the best, most effective product of keeping not only animals from chewing up our, $5,000 cannabis plant, but guys like you going in and taking it out and moving it out because you're eventually going to learn how deadly it is. And I went, no shit. So, and the mindset is we don't care about human health and we don't care about water stealing. We don't care about your wildlife. We care about profits. We care about moving something for the organization. That's our big reward. And when we knew that mindset was what was driving these guys, obviously we knew one, we had to be more careful. We had to be far better equipped to deal with these poisons, and we had to educate. And something I've been pushing, brother, more than anything else with both books and all the TV and all the documentaries and the news stuff that you and I mutually do is just know, people, what's going on. Know that this cartel threat we have embedded in America, yeah, I focused on the weed. That's kind of my forte, obviously, because of the environmental impacts. But these are polycriminals that are involved in every aspect of cartel crimes. P2P, super meth, same group, different faction that's doing some of the weed operations, right? The fentanyl production that you and I both know, hundreds of thousands of Americans are dying. That stuff is nasty. Fentanyl and the cartels from the Sinaloa side have actually, I now live full-time in Montana, have relocated from California, still spend a lot of time in California because work and caring about the stuff that we're talking about. But the least populated state, and what they call one of the last great places in America, is now being infiltrated by the Sinaloa cartel and Jalisco New Generation on the fentanyl problem into tribal lands, into tribal communities, into other rural communities, and impacting that. So these are the same factions that are still or have been involved in the weed trade in the past, and human trafficking and child sex trafficking and gun running. It's all being done by all of them. So anyone that says, I hear about this weed thing, but I don't use cannabis. These poisons sound nasty. I don't live anywhere near a wooded area where a cartel's got a grow site going. I said, yeah, but you have children that are at risk of trafficking. You have fentanyl, I guarantee, in your schools right now because they're everywhere. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? So all of these things factor into the mindset of this is an American problem for all of us. It's not just my weed fight. It's not just California. It's not just the Texas border where you're operating and living. It's all of it. And these poisons now are everywhere. They are everywhere in these grow sites. And what I was able to talk about in Congress last October when talking about specifically how widespread this problem is across the border. And when you mentioned and asked, hey, how many miles from the border was that grow site you found? That's where Congress had to get past just focusing on the border. Yeah. Border control, this is an issue. Well, guys, it goes way beyond that. It's embedded in Silicon Valley going back 20, 30 years. And now it's in Montana and it's been there a lot of years. So we need to look at that. And these poisons aren't going away. They're being imported still. And we've also seen now a really kind of current event now is the Chinese element and the Chinese organized crime groups now working hand in hand with Sinaloa and Jalisco New Generation, collaborating on the Chinese taking over a majority of the weed trade. And then in exchange for precursor chemicals for fentanyl and super meth, to the Mexican cartels, as you know. And we just got wind of that late last fall and started to see this in Northern California. And with a lot of friends in DEA and people I'm working with, actually, we're educating on this stuff. And the congressional groups weren't really aware of that. And they went, wait a minute. So China organized crime from mainland are absolutely embedded and in cahoots with the Mexican cartels, and at the same process laundering billions of cash dollars within middle America with all these crimes, and they're working together. I said they absolutely are. And anybody that doesn't, isn't aware of this on a domestic security program needs to know, just for security purposes, what we're facing right now.
I wanted to go, and absolutely love it. The Chinese conversation is interesting, where that's just something that everyone, I think, should be paying attention to and seeing where that goes. I try not to steer any kind of agenda, just like the conversation we're having right now is perfect, right? There's just facts. Yeah. And I think that's how we really move the needle in the conversation, where you say it's an American problem. I think all Americans should be concerned with this. This is not a left or right. This isn't a liberal. It doesn't matter. This is a problem for all Americans here in this country. And so that's why I really love this conversation even more, because it's that. The questions I have is, how is this connected to human trafficking? Is it just the fact that when these grows are happening, they help finance and fund other organizations, or they continue to, is that what it is?
It very much is. But the other thing we're seeing human trafficking, from these cartel groups, and we're seeing some of the people trafficked actually put into these grow sites to run them and operate them under direction. And what's interesting is what we started to see these last couple of years, Vince, is with the Chinese and Mexican cartels working together, we're getting military-age males right now, as you know, coming across the border by the thousands with clean passports from mainland China. And those guys are here with skill sets. Those guys are here to run like a grow operation, say in Northern California. I just talked with Michigan State Police and worked with them a week or so ago, in Pennsylvania and Maine and all these other states now that are seeing the Asian cartel element in the marijuana trade. And they're running across a ton of Chinese and then Mexican workers being trafficked to work in these grow sites. Some of them are actually, they're under duress, where they're working and they're told they're going to get paid and they're not getting paid. We've even seen in extreme cases where they're all being put into like a large RV to, sleep for the night, and the lock goes on the latch from the outside. They're not allowed to leave. And then they're working, under duress in these grow sites. The other thing is, it's just kind of a leverage thing where, hey, I'm a little short, but I'm going to pay you a little bit later. And, they start to realize they're not getting paid, and they're just kind of holding on. The typical, cartel MO of kind of manipulating and stringing people along until they have to get violent. Same thing with the meth and the fentanyl thing going on in northeastern Montana that I just mentioned, that Andy Stump and I talked about a lot on the last Change Agents, both being from Montana. We did a second episode together because that was so close to us. So again, it for the sake of the country that you and I are both so proud to be a part of and have fought for, that's one thing of why we do what we do. And I think I can, honestly speak for all of us in this conversation. But when it gets to your backyard, from California, my backyard, literally ground zero that would lead to our team being built, to my backyard in Montana now, it just tells you it's in everybody's backyard. Yeah. So everybody needs to look at this as a personal problem. And you made a really good point when you said, everyone needs to know it's not a political issue. It's not a left. It's not a right. It's not where you sit. And it's not where you sit on the cannabis. Are you a cannabis user? Are you absolutely against it? Do you lean right? Do you lean left? Whatever the case may be. This is an American issue. And one thing, Vince, on this cannabis thing, I've done what we're talking about. I do presentations and I talk to agencies. I do, some tactical training. I debrief our lessons learned from shooting debriefs, building the team. But I also do some public presentations that go into just the impacts and the pictures and the videos and the missions that I show. And people are like, what? Whoa, whoa, whoa. Yeah, that's in our forest. That's for cannabis. And I've talked to grower groups. I've talked to animal rights groups that lean very left. I've talked to conservation groups that are hunters and fishermen that tend to lean a little right. When I talked to Joe Rogan about this, he had no idea, but he's a cannabis guy and he's an elk hunter. So he's like, whoa, this is bullshit, man. This thin green line fight that you guys are about is absolutely important. I didn't know about this. Yeah, we need to get this out. And the thing that's coolest about this, Vince, is it unifies. I have had so many completely opposite end spectrums in the same room watching these talks. And some people are crying their eyes out if they like wildlife, seeing dead bears, seeing dead mountain lions and this and that and deer, the poisons, the punji pits, the guns, the bad guys. And everybody resonates. Everyone gets a little bit of pride. Everybody, kind of lowers their guard with, wanting to fight on the left and the right and realizing that, hey, this is a real problem we all need to address and we can unify on it. The bipartisan congressional committee, which had a couple of divisive ideas going from the Dems and the Republicans on that side. And I knew doing my research on who I was going to be presenting to, but I'll tell you, you could hear a pin drop when the statement went out and I put some of the stuff out in numbers, what we're talking about today, and then took questions. I saw a unity that I hadn't seen in a long time. And I went, okay, we're on to something here. Yeah. Maybe we can start focusing on this as a national priority, in lieu of all the other stuff we're trying to puppeteer around the globe, to put it mildly.
No, I love that. And I never thought this would be the conversation, but I can see how everyone could have a bleeding heart for this topic, for our families, our kids' safety, but also the animals, the environment. Yeah, I think you're right about that, which is pretty fascinating. Are things getting worse?
Yeah, they are. They are getting worse just because I think where we are administratively. I think at the point now with all of the border flooding and what the impacts have transpired into. It has gotten a little bit worse. It's gotten worse on fentanyl. It's gotten worse on human trafficking. I think we're making a better dent on the weed issue now. Definitely. We're still being outnumbered and outproduced because of this Chinese collusion with the Mexican cartels. But one thing is law enforcement teams are better trained. They're dedicated to it. For instance, my old agency, California Department of Fish and Wildlife, there's approximately 500 game wardens sworn in my old group, and 100 of them are dedicated to cannabis enforcement under a delineated program just to do that, because the environmental hits are there. So we're going after big crimes. We're going after big, environmental protection cases. We're prosecuting felony stuff, whether it's water pollution, it's EPA banned toxics, all those toxic poisons they bring in are felonies. Human trafficking, we're, finding that in the grows and just looking at it as more of a serious problem and getting the education out there. So while it has gotten worse, I'm optimistic still, brother, because awareness is growing. I mean, obviously for, you and I to get together on your new show and have this spin-off from some stuff we both mutually done elsewhere, we're going to reach some more people. I get emails and calls from all over the country daily just on, hey, I can't believe this. How did I not know about this? And, I hear trafficking, human trafficking. I saw Sound of Freedom. I'm terrified for my kids. I know what's going on, but I did not know those impacts at the border have so much impact with that ripple effect embedded into the country. So we're making a dent. Yeah. But we have to make some significant regulation changes. And we have to make some, I think, administrative policy changes to focus, like I said, as a priority to tackle this thing as a collective national problem with all the cartel crimes, not just the environmental side.
Yeah, that was actually my next question is, how can this issue effectively be addressed? And I understand.
Like I said, yeah.
Please go ahead.
Yeah, I think right now it's not just throwing a lot of law enforcement at it, I liken an analogy we talked about on a different podcast. It's like a big dam that you build to hold back that water and protect that water. And the dam has gotten so weak and there's so many holes in the dam that, the Met team and, your old unit and the Texas Rangers and the Texas Troopers doing their thing, whatever we're doing at whatever part of the country to fight this fight, there's all these holes popping out of the dam and it's leaking and we're putting, we're plugging this hole for a minute and then we got to go plug this other hole. And pretty soon we got, way too many holes leaking water because we don't have enough assets to plug all the holes. We need a new dam.
Yeah.
Bottom line is we need a new dam, brother. And we need a new dam that doesn't only crack down hardcore on these crimes, both south and north of the border. I think this is something we have to do with Mexico. I think Dan Crenshaw, senator down in Texas, I like what he was trying to go after from the standpoint of working with Mexico and in Mexico and working on our side of the border on both sides. These are eco-terrorists, man. They are embedded. They're not only embedded in America, they're embedded in the world. We need to educate our kids. There's needs to be funding for that on fentanyl, on human trafficking awareness, how to avoid it. Our parents, rehab centers, counseling, units. It really has to be looked at as kind of post 9/11, I think.
Yeah.
What did we do for security after 9/11? What did we do with TSA? What did we do with airline security? What did we do with what teams like yours and mine were operating and doing domestically? I mean, I know you guys had to have gotten shifted into 9/11 issues. We certainly did, on and off water. And this isn't any different. It's just not. It's not as immediately violent as a 9/11 attack, but it's even more sinister and deadly because that attack is going like a slow bleed. I mean, we're poison. The fentanyl is a poison. It's deadly. P2P is a poison and deadly instantly. These carbofuran insecticides that are on the weed, they are poisonous, obviously. So nothing good is coming out of this. And I think if we right the ship, and I'm hoping some good things happen this year, we'll see. And what spans out from that, if we right the ship a little bit as far as prioritizing it, then long-windedly, I think we're going to make a dent. I think we can take it back, because you and I both know anyone that hears this story of what you've done and what I've done and what the people in our world are doing, either on the law enforcement, military side, or even on the civilian side, no one in America is not blown away and scared of this problem once they know. Yeah. And that's what has to happen, in my opinion.
Yeah, they have to hear it from a voice of reason that they feel comfortable with and confident in. The way you speak on the subject, I absolutely love it. I think the other thing that what Americans need to realize is that it's a supply and demand issue. And as much as we have issues, we have issues at the border, we also have issues in America. That why is there such a high consumption of drugs, right? And we really have to check ourselves and saying what's happening in our families, what's happening in our culture, what's happening in our societies, that drugs are so prevalent these days, even more so than they were in the past. And when you talk about it's almost the yin and yang, right? If you talk about the border issues as well and the drugs, well, it's like, man, but why do we consume so much of those drugs? And that is just a part of the conversation people forget.
Yeah. I think you hit it on the head. It's that demand. Obviously, we can't, these guys can't operate unless we want it. And sadly, America is, if not the biggest consumer of most of those drugs coming out of these operations. They're very close. I didn't even know this figure that we're the biggest consumer of child sex trafficking in America.
Yes, we
when
are.
all of that stuff came out, with all the work Ballard's doing and all the other organizations that we don't hear about, I'm so excited that that's finally an issue, that finally, a movie like that makes it visceral. And, from working, in front of the camera, even in scripted stuff or documentaries, you don't really, I think you get to people the visceral connection to an issue comes out of that type of medium. And we hear about it. You and I have worked it. But even I was so moved by that movie, I was teared up. I was ripping the frickin', the handrails of that seat, watching it July 6th last year. And I've worked these guys. Yeah. We've worked these guys. And so for America to respond to something like that and actually be motivated to move with it and pay attention, I think we need more of that. And
absolutely.
Fortunately, we're starting to see more of that on that and lessen that demand, man. We got to lessen that demand. And it really starts with that counseling we were talking about, educating our kids early. I talked to a lot of junior high school assembly groups on this cartel cannabis thing because I'm very close to the Emerald Triangle of California, where, the weed capital of the world is. And, when you talk to these kids and they're all smoking weed or they're all using it, it's regulated in this state. It's out of, the Emerald Triangle is like so sanctioned. I just said, look, guys, I'm not here as big brother to say, don't use cannabis. I'm not telling you to do anything. You're going to make choices. You're going to experiment. Your kids, I mean, we all went through it. Some of us did, some of us didn't growing up. I said, I just want you to know what's going on out there. Watch this video. Look at these pictures. Know what is happening. Know what you might be ingesting. And also know that if you buy that stuff or you get that stuff from, say, a cartel grow, what you're actually facilitating, what you're actually endorsing indirectly. And they see the dead animals and they see the poisons and they see our dogs being stabbed and attacked. And they're like, oh, screw that, man. No, I've had a lot of kids just say, no, I'm not touching it because I don't know where my cannabis is coming from, or I'm going to take a better step. Right. Same thing on the fentanyl issue. Yeah. Kids, high school athletes that aren't really using drugs for any reason other than pain killing because they're varsity volleyball players or football. They take a poison pill. I've seen this in the Silicon Valley with relatives, Vince, where valedictorian high school gal varsity volleyball, takes a pain pill from a friend that comes out of what looks like a sedate prescribed bottle from a doctor, goes into her bedroom that night to study and do her homework, and mom can't wake her up the next day. She's done. That was in the affluent Silicon Valley. And I can't think of a more visceral connection. If it can happen here, it can happen anywhere. So do we, and this question came up with Andy, like, do we have test kits, for fentanyl for kids, if they're going to use them? Do we say, don't touch this stuff at all? See me, we'll go see a doctor. We'll do a non-narcotic pain med. I mean, there's some real big issues here that we got to look at with our kids.
Yeah.
And,
I got kids. I got teenagers. I got high schoolers. I got college kids. And it's just recently those Kansas City Chiefs fans who took drugs, right? It was just like, casual, just, and it laced in fentanyl, killed 3 of them, right? They found themselves outside, frozen to death. And it's like, I try to explain to my kids about, like, look, you have no idea what you're taking these days. Obviously the college girls I'm more scared of because they're they have more availability of seeing drugs and being around it. But these kids in schools, my son told me in his school, there's kids that are doing drugs in the bathroom, and I'm like, brother, please do not be dumb enough to try anything. You know what I'm saying? Like, ask me. It's just, these days, everything seems to be laced with something, and you just never know what's going to be laced with fentanyl and to the dosage that actually puts you in respiratory distress. And it's a scary time for us.
Yeah. And the scary thing about your kids, just thinking of them stepping out, a very scary time. And I mean, one mistake, right? It's not like in the days when you and I were teenagers and you got a bad strain of weed, maybe you had a stomach ache, maybe you were a little nauseous, or whatever. They get one chance. And if they take that pill, there's no going back, man. And that's a scary thing. And the fact that you're talking to your kids about it, and I have a lot of kids in my world, and same type of deal, talking to them all the time, saying, guys, just you got to be really careful. This is not something you can make 1, 2, 3 mistakes before you wisen up. It's one bad, deadly pill and it's suicide. It really is. So, and a national look at that, I think, is going to be huge. And that's part of what you just brought up, is lessen that demand, brother, by educating early.
Yeah, I agree. I think we got to look at our families. We have to sit down with our kids. We have to establish why there's such a prevalence of drugs in America, and we really need to start attacking that. It's kind of like, a full-scale approach. Yes, focus on securing this border, but also let's focus on the American families. Let's focus on the households and why we have such a big drug issue. I think that's the only approach you can do to actually see some kind of dent in this.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. And I'm glad we're able to talk about it and able to network it a little bit. And I know I'm pushing hard. I'm pushing hard right now because I love our country. I know we got a lot of issues right now. I know it's been rockier than it's ever been in our lifetimes. But I'll tell you what, when I'm in the Montana mountains or I'm in the Silicon Valley foothills, and I'm working with friends and family and kids and grandkids, and it's just I think too many of us take for granted what this nation has to offer, and they don't get to see even a small percentage of what it has to offer, and I'm
guilty of that myself,
Yeah.
And I'll tell you this, the beautiful thing is being able to talk to others who appreciate what America has, and those in this country who forget there's still thousands who are running here for the land of opportunity. And those of us who have the opportunity to be here, I think we should just take that. We shouldn't take it for granted as much as some are. And so, I appreciate people like you who still believe in this great nation, still believe in the country and what it stands for. And I thank you for your time. Thank you for listening to Borderland, an Ironclad original. Make sure that you go and like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and on YouTube at This Is Ironclad.